A man aimed at a wild deer, but just as he pulled the trigger, he ended up hitting a little boy instead. Both of them instantly felt as if the sky had collapsed. They thought it was just their imagination, but when they hurried over to check, they discovered they had really hit the boy. Nick's mind went completely blank in an instant. He knelt on the ground, trying to wake the boy, but the boy, shot in the head, had already completely lost all signs of life. Nick broke down. Just as Nick was at a loss, the boy's father, hearing the gunshot, rushed over. When he saw his son lying dead on the ground, the old father was instantly overwhelmed with grief. Looking at Nick, the killer, he picked up the hunting rifle on the ground. Nick kept explaining that it was all an accident, but the man, blinded by rage, couldn't listen at all. He was ready to avenge his beloved son. Before he could fire, a bullet pierced his heart. It turned out Anton had fired the shot. To protect Nick, he had no choice but to kill and silence him. In the blink of an eye, they now bore the weight of 2 lives. Nick was already terrified and flustered. They had traveled thousands of miles to hunt, yet somehow had become murderers. Compared to Nick's panic, Anton was surprisingly calm. He unhurriedly dragged the 2 bodies into the grass to hide them, then pulled Nick away, quickly driving away from the crime scene. Nick still hadn't recovered, and had no idea what to do. Anton drove the car into the forest to the north, picked up his hunting rifle, and prepared to keep hunting. Nick hurried to ask why. Only then did Anton explain the reason. It turned out he was faking an alibi for not being in that forest. He said they couldn't run away yet, because if they fled out of fear, that would completely confirm them as the murderers. Now, they had to pretend they knew nothing. They had to wait until late at night to deal with the body. Only then could they leave the town. After hearing Anton's explanation, Nick could only go along. To create the alibi, the 2 of them went to a nearby town, walked into a shop to get their faces remembered, and deliberately hinted to the shopkeeper that they had been hunting there. After doing all this, they drove back to the inn. Back in their room, they still felt uneasy, because they had come here specifically for vacation. If they stayed in their room all the time, it would definitely arouse suspicion. To avoid being found out, they forced themselves to act natural, and walked into the town's tavern. Unexpectedly, as soon as they entered a private room, they saw the mayor there. The mayor warmly invited them to dine. It turned out that whenever outsiders came to hunt, the mayor would warmly host them. The 2 men, who had committed a murder, could only pretend to be calm. Anton even casually mentioned that they were hunting in the northernmost forest. By late night, the 2 drove to the crime scene to bury the bodies. While Nick dug the hole, Anton suddenly thought of something. The bullets they had fired hadn't all been found. If the bodies were discovered, the police could identify them from the serial numbers on the bullets. After searching for a while, Anton only found 1 bullet in a tree stump. The other was nowhere to be found. Then he suddenly remembered. 1 bullet had hit the boy's head. He touched the back of the boy's head, and found no blood stains there. This meant the bullet was still lodged in the boy's skull. He had no choice but to cut into the boy's head with a knife, to remove the bullet inside. After a lot of effort, the 2 packed all the evidence into the trunk. They quickly drove back to the inn. At that moment, Nick looked back and saw a little boy upstairs staring at him. Seeing that it was a child, they didn't pay it any mind. To avoid complications, they agreed to leave at dawn. But because they were so exhausted, when they woke up, it was already afternoon. They hurried to pack their luggage. Just then, they heard a commotion downstairs. Anton cautiously went to the window to look, and saw that their car tires had been slashed, with several burly men gathered around the car. Anton went downstairs to ask what was going on.
Hey, tell me what you did. Tell me what you did.
What the hell's going on?
Hey, you fucking fucker! What are you doing? Fucking bastard. Tell me what you did. Tell me what you did. You fucking Carter.
The brothers let out a sigh of relief. For a moment they thought their murders had been discovered. It turned out the real reason was that Anton had messed with a man's daughter. A few days earlier, the 2 had just arrived in the small town. Bored, they walked into a bar to get drunk. There, Anton met the man's daughter. After drinking, Anton took the girl to play house. When the man found out, he slashed Anton's tires in anger, to teach him a lesson. Fortunately, the mayor arrived in time to stop the man, saving Anton from a beating. Now, with their tires slashed, the brothers had to put their escape plans on hold. They could only take the car to the repair shop. When the shop owner saw who they were, he charged them $5,000 for a single tire, and said it wouldn't be ready until tomorrow. The 2 were furious, but since they were on someone else's turf, they could only swallow their anger and go back. Frustrated, they headed into the bar again. They had just sat down, when they heard all the villagers inside, talking about the disappearance of a father and son. Hearing this, the brothers instantly panicked. They hurriedly left the bar, and returned to the inn, their faces pale. Clearly, the disappearance of the father and son had already drawn the villagers' attention. Even so, Anton still clung to a sliver of hope. He thought the forest was vast, and finding the bodies of the father and son would be like searching for a needle in a haystack. All they had to do was survive the night, and drive away first thing in the morning. But just as he finished speaking, there came a knock at the door. Nick cautiously opened it, only to find that it was a villager inviting them to join a local bonfire party. To avoid arousing suspicion, the two had no choice but to attend. But the moment they arrived, they sensed something was wrong. The surrounding residents were all staring at them with unfriendly eyes. The little boy who had seen them go out at night was now talking to others. Feeling guilty, the two began to panic. At that moment, a villager came to fetch them, bringing them to the mayor. It turned out the father and son they had killed were the mayor's brother-in-law and nephew, who had been missing for several days. The mayor suspected they had run into danger in the forest, and had organized a search party. The reason he had asked Nick and his brother to come was because he hoped they could help in the search. Though extremely reluctant, they had to agree in order not to raise suspicion. The mayor then handed them the repaired car keys, telling them to drive and join the search. In the car, the two were tense. Anton believed the mayor had already begun to suspect them, and that returning the car was a way to test them. If they turned around and fled, it would confirm they were involved in the father and son's disappearance. The only choice was to follow the villagers into the forest. After all, it was vast, and finding the bodies would be no easy task. What they hadn't expected was that the mayor knew the forest extremely well, and was fully aware that Nick and Anton had first gone hunting there. Just then, the villagers brought hunting dogs, and soon the group entered the forest, heading straight for the burial site. Spotting signs of disturbed soil, they began to dig. Before long, the father and son's bodies were unearthed. The brothers' faces instantly changed. While the villagers were still overcome with grief, they turned and bolted, racing toward their vehicle. It didn't take long for the villagers to notice their escape, but by the time they gave chase, the brothers had already started the car and fled. They hadn't gone far before the fuel line began leaking. The mayor had already suspected them earlier, and had sabotaged their car. Soon, all the gas was gone. Helpless, the two abandoned the vehicle and ran into the forest. The pursuing villagers unleashed the hunting dogs. It didn't take long before they caught up, knocking Anton to the ground. Nick rushed to help, only to have his leg bitten by a dog. Anton quickly drew his knife and killed the animal, but Nick was already covered in wounds. With the villagers about to catch up, Anton left Nick behind. What awaited Nick was the villagers' unrestrained fury. After venting their rage, the mayor ordered some to pursue Anton, while the rest took Nick back. Nick was brought to a warehouse, where he faced the angry villagers. With no way out, he confessed everything. The mayor was heartbroken upon hearing the truth. Just then, a villager shouted that Anton had been caught. The mayor handed Nick a hunting rifle. They didn't want to stain their own hands with blood, but someone had to pay for the wrongful deaths. They told Nick that if he killed Anton, it would appease the villagers' anger, and they would let him go. Looking at the childhood friend he had grown up with, Nick couldn't bring himself to do it. Seeing his hesitation, the mayor reminded him to think carefully. Kill Anton, and he could leave. Refuse, and both of them would die here. Hearing this, Nick finally raised the rifle. With a single gunshot, Anton died at his hands. The mayor kept his word, allowing Nick's wife to take him away. They spared him not out of mercy, but because he had personally killed his best friend, and carried the weight of multiple lives on his conscience. For the rest of his life, he would live in pain and fear. Such a punishment was far more cruel than death. Though still breathing, Nick was nothing more than a walking corpse.